Morning Express. In case you're just joining us, my name is Jesse Rogers and we're here to inform you about the latest in times of developments. And we want to take a look at the latest in terms of politics. On Political Point, it has been a political heated week, or a start to the year for that matter. A lot has happened. The president addressed the mountain through vernacular radio stations, and it just wasn't him. Musalia Mudavadi followed, and right after, it is the former Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga, ODM party leader, who spoke to the populous region, trying to bring them on board in terms of the constitutional reforms ahead of the BBI. We'll definitely canvass this and much more in terms of the road to 2022 and all the political rhetoric we can see being thrown left, right and center. Join us as we make sense out of all that we've seen. Well, joining me already in studio, James Gakuya, who is the Embakasi North Member of Parliament. Many thanks for your time. And we're also joined by Alex Manyasi via way of Zoom, who's a governance and policy expert. I'd like to begin on the latest story touching on the road to 2022. And this happened as Raila Odinga faced Mount Kenya. Now, in a renewed charm offensive of President Uhuru Kenyatta's backyard, the ODM leader told the region it owes him a big political debt accumulated over the 57 years by Kenya's 3 presidents. And now it is time to repay, it seems. I'd like to begin on that note. Alex Manyasi, I'll start with you. What was your take home after you watched Raila's interview right there? What did you make of it?
Thank you, Jesse. Good morning to all viewers this morning, and morning to Mheshimiwa as well. I think it's when a president that is coming from a region is exiting the scene, and when we have not seen that region say that they're going to produce a presidential candidate, then obviously what you see is all presidential hopefuls trying as much as they can to make sure that they have either that vote or part of that vote. So I think, in my view, that is what is going on. The contenders are trying as much as possible to make sure that they have as much as they could pick from the Mount Kenya region. Of course, that region is known to be a very unique region in the sense that they are rarely divided in terms of whom they want to vote for, apart from, of course, once when there was Uhuru Kenyatta and Mwai Kibaki, when they seemed to have made, speaking, the wrong decision. That was the only time that they actually voted for someone when one of their own was also on the ballot. And that someone that they had wanted did not succeed. So looking at going after that region is a natural reaction from all the contenders, in my view.
Okay, a natural reaction, quite so, and we expect a lot more visits to the mountain region, even as we expect support for the BBI to start in that region. Let's just cross over to right here in studio. I'd like to bring you on board, James Gakuya. It's interesting to see the former PM attack the hustler narrative as a recipe for hatred that can lead to anarchy. What do you make of the address to the mountain region as we start off?
Thank you very much. Let me salute the viewers wherever they are watching us from. Coming to the debate, it's very true that the Mount Kenya region broke votes is not something to ignore. And going to the previous past elections, it has proved that Mount Kenya, it can back you well. They only require a top-up, and then they can convince you with the numbers required as far as the current thresholds in our constitution is now 50+1. And therefore, it is very true that actually Mount Kenya region, as the numbers are as much as they are, they cannot make their own to clinch that particular threshold of 50+1. And therefore, this makes themselves, they have to look for somebody to negotiate with in order to at least find themselves somewhere. Going by Raila's claim, it's very true that in fact Raila have sacrificed himself. Nobody can ignore that. During Kibaki's presidential term, Raila Odinga is the one who declared Kibaki Tosha. And this is not something we can forget as a nation. It's only that Kibaki took over when he was a bit injured during his campaign trail. And Odinga performed very well, because when Kibaki was injured and himself and his deputy were out of country because they were both injured, actually Laila took over the whole campaign throughout. And Kibaki didn't come back to campaign after his injury at Machakos. So what happens, Laila delivered the whole election, and at least he was then the general. And this is not something to say otherwise. But after the formation of that government, it is very clear, Laila, I don't want to dwell very much in the MOU, because the MOU was silent. It was not public. If it was public, this is something else, that is something that the public could have carried it with. But since it was not public, it was something which was private. And what I can say, Kibaki did not betray Laila, because immediately Kibaki took over, the cabinet was shaped, and Laila and his team, they were all were part of government, and they were cabinet ministers. It's only that there was that only one element of prime minister where the purported MOU had agreed that actually he would become the prime minister. This was something to be done within the corridors, and it never materialized. But this, I don't think that could be able to, could be the reason to bring the division thereafter. Right. But what brought the division thereafter is what we call banana and oranges. And that's why when after that particular referendum, it became so biased that in fact it brought a lot of division in the then NAC government. And that's how Laila was thrown down by the then Kibaki regime. Mm-hmm.
So it seems a lot in history has been playing right there, but we'll definitely focus on the past and the present as well. Also joining us to help us decipher some of the political developments that have happened recently is Senator Moses Kajwang, the Homa Bay Senator, joining us via way of Zoom. Senator, many thanks for your time. I'd like to begin on your quick reaction to the what we saw Raila Odinga do. He actually talked to the mountain region, obviously pushing for the BBI in the region. What do you make, first of all, of the political and the developmental tone that will come with this address?
Thank you, and a good morning to all our viewers and my co-panelists. It was important that Raila Odinga talks directly to the community that surrounds Mount Kenya through news channel that is popular within the region. This being politics, it's important that when you have an idea, you go out there and talk to the people who stand to benefit from that idea. A very fake narrative has been painted by people, some of whom are my colleagues in the Senate, that on one hand, the BBI is unpopular, and on the other hand, the BBI stands to benefit the central region more. This is an irony, because if indeed the BBI stands to benefit the central region more, then it becomes the responsibility of the elected leaders to sell the benefits of the BBI to the people that they represent. So Raila Odinga, having noticed that there was some lethargy on the part of some elected leaders from the region, he decided to go directly and talk to them and sell to them the benefits that the BBI is bound to bring to the region. It is natural, and it happens in all democracies, that when a certain interest group is leaving power, they would be asking questions about how their interest would be safeguarded. As we know, Kenyan politics has been played on an ethnic chessboard, and it is clear that once President Uhuru Kenyatta leaves office, we will have a successor who most likely will not come from the mountain region. Well, you never know. I mean, 2 years is a long time in politics, but all indicators are that his successor will come from a region outside the central region. And so the BBI has got a lot of good ideas and a lot of good elements in it that will ensure that the interests of the central region are protected. But then, let us be careful. BBI is not just for central. BBI is not just for Raila Odinga. What BBI tries to affirm and entrench in our constitution and in our statutes is a respect for private property, is a cohesive society where people are able to work and to do business anywhere. The greatest concerns of particularly the people who come from the central Kenya region is, will they have the opportunity to trade and do business anywhere in the Republic? Will they have the opportunity to settle anywhere in the Republic? Will they have the opportunity to go back to Uasin Gishu and Trans Nzoia, where their lands were confiscated as a result of electoral violence? And can they go back and farm? And can we have an electoral system that ensures that every 5 years we do not have what we call tribal clashes in Molo, what we call tribal clashes in Kiambaa and other parts of the country? I think that that is a message that Raila Odinga was taking out to the central region, that their interests will be taken care of, and those interests fall squarely, they dovetail very well with the interest of other communities in the Republic.
All right, and it's proper that we're speaking about interest, because some of the interest, not just for the Mount Kenya region, but Kenya as a whole, is the implementation of promises that were given by the current Jubilee administration. Senator, according to DP William Ruto, the other side, which seems maybe hinting at ODM, pushed its way into government through the handshake, took over committees in parliament, and have failed miserably. And now they want to run away. That's according to DP Ruto. And he says that Jubilee hasn't done this and that. That's the lingo we've seen left, right, and center. My question to you is, ODM to blame?
I think the deputy president is engaging in deceit. He knows that for the first term of Jubilee administration, they had power undiluted, they had power undisturbed. In fact, he never wasted an opportunity to remind us that we should salivate as they chew the meat. The DP and the Jubilee administration had its own manifesto, which ran for the first 5 years. When they went back for re-election, we know how the election turned out. They came up with a Big Four agenda, which was an emphasis of their first term in office and an emphasis, a cherry-picking of some of the components of Vision 2030. So we have been in a handshake arrangement with President Uhuru Kenyatta. Mind you, we are not in a coalition agreement. We are not in government. Even though some of us I chair the devolution committee in the Senate, but it is a chair that I've held for less than 1 year. So you cannot blame us for the errors of omission or errors of commission of Jubilee. In fact, if it was not for the handshake, perhaps, if the post-election violence that we saw and the chaos that we saw during the time and the moment after the swearing in of Raila Amolo Odinga, and some of the chaos we are being told by Sonko that they're the ones who instigated them, it was not us. If that was to partner with the COVID pandemic, I'm telling you that this economy would be in serious problems. If anybody should be thanked for rescuing this economy, it is Raila Amolo Odinga and those of us who saw it fit to cease fire for the good of the nation. The deputy president must account to the Republic and to the people of Kenya, and would like to hear him answer some of the questions that Kalonzo Musyoka posed about his own personal integrity, or some of the questions that Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga posed about his 6-month promises. It is the height of deceit to accuse ODM of the shortcomings of a government that has been undisturbed for a period of 7 years.
So the handshake did not include Jubilee's development agenda. James, it's interesting because, I mean, we've seen the trade of words and the blame game that has encompassed the development agenda of this particular administration. What say you? Did ODM stir the water? What do you hold according to this?
Let me say, Senator, have reasoned very well, but he cannot purport that they are not in what we call correction, because it is not necessarily a coalition which works. There was what we call mutual agreement in what we call handshake, which nobody knows. It's only the principals which are aware of it. But we have just witnessed some of its findings, because having an opposition which have taken over both the National Assembly parliamentary committees and Senate, I believe that is totally to tell you or to demonstrate that now the ODM is in government, because these positions there before, they were held by those purported to be in the government then. Therefore, today, it is a confused state, and there is no way that ODM can claim to Kenyans or anybody else that they are not part of the government, since they control those chief committees, because those chief committees are the drivers.
Mheshimiwa, let me ask you.
Once you assume the steering, you cannot again deny that you are not the driver.
Let me ask you, how many committees involved in the day-to-day running of affairs in the government does ODM control?
There are more than 10 committees.
Is that the majority?
The total committees are only 24.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So why are we pointing fingers at the ODM, yet Jubilee might still hold more committees, just as you've...
This I can tell for sure that, in fact, it's ODM which holds the majority, because the rest are only few with KANU, few with other partners like Wiper and ANC. Otherwise, if we can say it's ODM who holds the majority with the 10 out of 24. The rest are shares very, very minor.
All right, that's interesting. Senator, I'll come back to you, but I'd like Alex Manyasi to throw his weight into this, because as Kenyans, we did elect for a joint ticket, Uhuru Ruto. So when the blame game starts, whose side should Kenyans side with?
Jesse, I think we also need to divorce the difference between the executive and the legislature for some of these things to make sense to Kenyans. So that we talk about what the executive is responsible for and the oversight that is required from the legislature. Because when we mix those, then it becomes difficult to understand who is responsible for what in terms of running of affairs of government. But having said that, I guess it's only in this part of the world where when promises are made, Kenyans in the next election do not make that decision based on the delivery of the promises that were made. It's a very sad affair that is where we keep cycling at. If you think about many countries in Africa and some parts of Asia, you'll see that leaders will say one thing and come for re-election and say the exact opposite and run away from what they said in the initial times. So it's unfortunate, and that's why we will continue having the challenges that we have for quite some time. The electorate, unfortunately, also is not very informed, and I don't know what we'll do about this. Probably we need to speak about them even much more. And if you listen to even the debate among ourselves, the electorate needs to understand who's responsible for what areas of their lives. Because if you go to my rural home today, you'll find people, for example, asking an MCA what technically belongs to the MP and asking the MP what they should be asking the governor. And some of them up to today do not know what the responsibility of the women rep is or what the senator is responsible for. So unless we make sure that people understand who is oversighting who and who is responsible for executive power, and therefore who is responsible for bringing which type of development, and which parts of development are devolved and which ones are still at the national level. Those things are critical in terms of putting specific blame to specific either people or specific areas of government. Because when we do not do that, then we end up with this quagmire of blaming everybody for anything, which is not fair.
Okay, Senator, even as we take a look at some of the statements that have been made, in that particular statement I mentioned earlier by DP Ruto, saying the ODM side pushed its way into government and took over committees in parliament, it does actually hint at the penetration of ODM, not just in the executive, but legislature. And Manyasi brought a very important issue, separating these particular arms of government. As you add your voice to this, it would be interesting to get your take on the exact angle you'd like to approach this? Because Ruto did defend the president and himself, one way or the other. What do you make of all that?
I do agree with Alex that there is a separation of roles in government. You have parliament, judiciary, and the executive. The executive in our current constitutional setup is the one that is charged with making sure that the plans, policies, and aspirations of the nation are executed and are turned into reality. The role of parliament, on the other hand, is to legislate, to provide oversight, and to approve policy that would allow the executive to implement. If you look at the example given by the Deputy President, he's talking about parliamentary committees, and my very good friend Mheshimiwa has alluded to the fact that ODM holds quite a number of committees. Let me tell you, the only committee that you'd say could have an executive nature in the National Assembly is a budget committee, which has always been chaired by Ichung'wah, my very good friend, who is now a wheelbarrow advocate. He should tell us that in the 8 years that he was chairing the budget committee, what kind of policies did he approve or did he recommend? Because even as you look at the headlines today, the budget policy statement has been issued. And we are seeing a situation where we are sinking into a deeper hole of debt. We are sinking into bigger budget deficits, the kind of indiscipline that did not exist during the Mwai Kibaki days. So the people who have caused this problem, who have had the opportunity to oversight the national treasury and the national government for the last 8 years, what have they done? After messing up, they bolt out and they now start accusing other people of a mess. It is the height of deceit, as I said earlier. What this nation needs, and as an elected leader, I regularly talk to my constituents. I can tell you that today, many Kenyans are concerned about economic issues and economic factors. Many Kenyans, as a result of the COVID pandemic, they would wish to live in a country where they are able to do business or they are able to get employment, irrespective of tribe, irrespective of political inclination. But if you do a study of some of the countries that have been very successful to move from third world economies to per capita incomes exceeding $20,000. A country like Singapore is now at $60,000 per capita income, and yet at independence, we were almost the same. If you listen to people like Raila Amolo Odinga, he keeps using Singapore and South Korea as a template and as an example. That tells you that what we need to put in place, first of all, is to fix our politics. Singapore, at independence, had toxic politics. There was a communist insurgency. In fact, Lee Kuan Yew had a lot of problems governing, but they had to fix their politics for them to come up with an industrial policy that enabled them to take off and to get the level that they are at today. And that is the message, and that is the BBI. Let us fix our politics so that once and for all, we can now start focusing, we can now start looking at how to grow our economy. Now, when I hear some of our compatriots talk about wheelbarrows, I wonder, I ask myself, what is the industrial policy? What is the economic policy underpinning that wheelbarrow? If we live in a world that is digital, we live in a world where motor vehicles are going to be using solar for recharge rather than oil. We live in a world where things are not going to be the same way they were 10 years ago. What is the underlying policy and ideology about talking about wheelbarrows? What is it? Are we going to be a wheelbarrow producing nation? Are we going to be a wheelbarrow pushing nation? And to what end? What we need to hear, and how I wish that even the Deputy President, he would forge and he would morph his message into one that is policy oriented, so that we can clearly tell where we are heading with this wheelbarrow business. Because as it is now, it is an incitement of the masses, it is a radicalization of the masses, it is inciting a class war, and it is going to be dangerous because the person leading that radicalization himself is not a hustler. And it will not take too long before people realize that they're being deceived. It happened in the French Revolution. It can happen today.
All right, James Gahuya, even as I come over to you, the class war, incitement claims is definitely denting, or one or the other, slowing down the Ruto, the hustler narrative, the wheelbarrow agenda. But my question is, and even ODM Chief Raila Odinga did highlight this, he said he said Dr. Ruto stands for nothing in ideology and policy. He's only pulling a stunt on Kenyans that he is a hustler. How do you defend this? Is there an ideology in place?
Yes, before I get into that, allow me also to respond to an area where Kajwang has tackled. This is an element where he's trying to create a narrative that the regime of Jubilee is already a failed state, and they have failed economically, and they have failed to come up with policies to make sure that this country is in track. My big question is, I believe once you realize that a certain vessel is a burning vessel, in the first place, do you have any interest to even to dare to step in that particular already vehicle which has already gotten a fire? Because see, even yourself, you are going to get burnt inside it. So in the first place, then it tells me that Kajwang and his team, then they entered into a vessel that they were already aware that it's already a vessel already out of track. And what they could have done in the little time they have been inside that particular house is to make sure that this house stands back to its feet. Are they doing that? Are they supporting the president to bring back the control of the Kenya government where they found it already off the track? Or are they watching it to totally crumble? Because I don't believe that, in fact, today they can stand to say they are not part of it. If you are not part of it, was there any business to get into that particular concept in the first place? Getting back to where you have asked me about the Hurubaro narrative and any ideology, let me say this. I have repeated twice and thrice that actually Kenyans, we are not equal in size, and we are not equal economically.
True.
And we are breasted differently. There are such clash that actually Hurubaro to them is a daily tool which can be able to give food on their table. We cannot criminalize that those people, and that kind of tool to give them at least a food on the table actually is a poor narrative. It's like telling us those factories and Juakaris that actually manufactures Hurubaro, they are supposed to be closed down like yesterday. Yes, this is what we are trying to tell Kenyans. Because if we can take the narrative of Hurubaro as if it is a forgotten kind of an ideology, then you are telling Kenyans that we are grown economically to a situation where we could be in the area where we can be only using machineries in every work that we do in our areas. Are we at that level economically? Our economy has not allowed this country to be at that level. And therefore, we cannot criminalize Hurubaro, because Hurubaro will take us to that particular point where we shall reach to the level of cringing to those who are at the level of developed areas where they can always work using equipment or machineries. But today we are not there. In the area of radicalizing, I would say Ruto is not out to radicalize anybody. Political entry points matters. The ODM have their way. They let them look their own route to enter into politics of 2022. Yes, they have started now asking for presidential candidate to present the papers. It is part of the strategy. Let the other person also look his own political strategy, as long as one is not inciting Kenyans. Because at the end of the day, there is what we call every party have its blueprint. It knows what it sells to the public and what they want to do after the winning of an election. Ruto has his blueprint. Allow him to go his direction, how he can reach the people down there. Allow any other party to use its analogy, as long as nobody is misleading Kenyans.
Okay. Now, it's the truth of the matter. You've just spoken facts, yes? We do have people who push carts, wheelbarrows, and that's their way of income. We cannot run from that fact. The economy is where it is right now. But I believe the question of ideology and policy is determined to and to actually lift these people from that particular position where they are, to enable them, perhaps, who would want to push a wheelbarrow entire life? You'd want to prosper, and some of the legislations and some of the what the government enforces actually enables this through policy and all that. Back to my question. You've just also mentioned that parties do have ideologies and policies that enables them get to the people. So in terms of the wheelbarrow-nomics, what policy might we be looking at in the near future that will enable, yes, those who push wheelbarrows to actually enable themselves in life, not to stick at that particular point?
My take in this is that, in fact, one is to recognize that there is that kind of society. Mm-hmm. Once you recognize them, then you work with them and just partner with them. That does not mean that that is the only class we have. We have the middle class and we have the top class. You need all of them. But here what we are saying, let us start from that somebody who is down there, that forgotten down there, come up together so that we can build one Kenya together. Instead of starting the economy from above, going down. Okay. So when we start with somebody who is a cat, we recognize that fellow who pushes the cart. We recognize that fellow who is a beba. We recognize that fellow who is a mama boga. Then we will give them what we call a clean environment of endeavoring their area of enhancing their daily bread. Okay. And that is only way that we can be able to equip them and also motivate them to be better tomorrow, to having better tomorrow. I am my take in this. It may not be the same thing everywhere because dynamics are totally different. But in the area I represent, like in Nairobi, wheelbarrow is very important aspect. Okay. It is a tool that is very important because a mama boga who will litter down there, having a wheelbarrow, that is a store, that is a kiosk. He will be able to use that kiosk and then he will push the wheelbarrow back home. Okay. And therefore, to me, I cannot criminalize a wheelbarrow. I know it's a tool which can be able to deliver. Okay,
definitely important. We have to recognize quite so. Alex Manyasi, help us make sense out of this. The truth of the matter is, the bottom-up approach seems to be the main focal point in this discussion centered around wheelbarrow-nomics, right?
Yeah, if you think about, I think the DP is just being a bright politician in that sense. If you think about the economics of this country and the demographics, then you will realize that the bottom of the pyramid is actually very heavy. Even in terms of the people who work, when you have more than 70% in the informal sector, and then, of course, lands have been shrinking. So most Kenyans now are actually subsistence farmers, smallholder farmers. If you think about the people who are working out there today, if you think about Nairobi as an example, for example, you will see that almost 48% of Nairobians actually walk to work. Almost a similar number use public transport. And what remains as the people who drive to work in this town is probably less than 7%. That tells you that the dynamics of our economy and the incomes of our people are in dire situations. And so when you try to address the country like Kenya today, and the whole aspect of COVID has not helped things much. People have lost their jobs. If you see, and these are some of the pointers, if you see, for example, some of our young men who are using border borders, the reason why there has been an astronomical increase in the numbers of border borders is just the same pointer to lack of employment. Some of those people, by the way, I have spoken to them. Like there's one I was speaking to in town, who happened to have seen me or watched me during several instances. And he asked me about what I think about several other things. And I realized this guy is actually a graduate. So we have a very fundamental problem in our country. And we need to think beyond looking at what it is that we are going to gain from what we receive in terms of joining government. Unless we have a very clear plan on what needs to change this country, I can assure you that even getting to State House with a hustler narrative in itself will not give you an end to the success that you're looking for. Even if you get there with that narrative and you do not think beyond the wheelbarrow narrative, I can for sure tell you that we'll be back to this discussion 5 years down the line after 2022. So the issue is, my point is that we have very fundamental problems that we need to deal with. I have not seen yet, as at now, I have not seen bold decisions around how to radically change the economy. I have not seen, for example, the Ghana way of looking at saying we radically change the tax regime so that we put people back to work, so that we expand the industry, so that we make sure that we attract investment, so that we make sure that we expand the tax bracket. I have not seen those kind of things being discussed widely and being adopted as part of policy for the country called Kenya. So unless we start having those discussions, unfortunately, again, those discussions are very difficult for the normal mwananchi to understand.
True.
And so you will expect that those discussions happen with the elite, but with the mind knowing that ultimately those discussions will end up helping and supporting the ordinary mwananchi get to where they have been hoping. Some Kenyans are actually losing hope. Some people have been being hopeful for the last 50 years, and they're growing old, and they see their children's desperation. Some of them are seeing their grandchildren's desperation. You had 3 acres of land, now everybody has been divided into half, and you don't know what to do anymore. So those are realities that, unfortunately, we have not been tackling head on, and the leadership of this country, whether current or in future, those are things that they have to think about. If they have run out of ideas or decisions, then they should ask for help. I mean, this information is available. These kind of people who can support this kind of thinking are out there, and they can help in shaping how we think about our future.
Briefly, I'd like your take, Alex, on whether this particular talk can actually disintegrate into class wars, a recipe for hatred that can lead to anarchy. Do you believe that?
It already has. That's the unfortunate bit. And we have seen little pieces, and we don't know what will happen when we near 2022. Such that if Manyasi is driving on the road, and then the reason why I have no job is because of him. You see, when we degenerate into that kind of approach and thinking, then you see we lose the plot altogether. And what we need to be careful about is to make sure that we are not sliding into a situation where people think the reason why they have not succeeded is because of others.
All right.
What we should be thinking about is, if you look at countries, and Africa, by the way, and Kenya, for example, we don't even have anyone in this country who can be measured in terms of wealth on the global standards. So what is this wealth that we're talking about? As a country, we have nothing. So if you asked me, when you tell a Kenyan that the reason why they're suffering is because of the other, who is the other? Even when we talk about the Kenyatta family, in terms of the global rating, where are they? Where do they stand?
Okay.
Just yesterday, we were talking about Oxfam saying 10 people, for example, control, and they can feed everybody for the next, I don't know how long. So we need to think about creating, reducing the gap between the rich and the poor. But to do that, you need to create wealth.
All right.
You can't reduce the gap by dividing up. You reduce the gap by increasing the pie, so that now the people who don't have much can have something, and the people who have much can actually invest in Kenya and abroad.
Okay.
That's the thinking we need to have.
So it's a tricky, delicate balance. Senator, over to you. Even as I recognize the fact that you said we have to fix our politics, as you add up on what we've just talked about, I mean, when you mention fix our politics, and we see a couple of leaders perhaps mentioning, even previously, that Raila Odinga might be a hard sell in a certain area of this country. We also have the talk of political debt. Do you think this is some of the things we need to change?
I think we are muddying the waters by localizing this conversation to the Mount Kenya region. Kenya consists of 47 million inhabitants who are spread out from the northern to Vanga to Nyatike and to Mfangano, and to reduce this conversation to be a conversation around whoever gets Mount Kenya becomes the next president of Kenya, would then make nonsense of the other communities and the other regions that exist in this country. I want to believe, because I've spent a lot of time with Raila Odinga and I've listened to him in public events, that perhaps the conversation around debt was more of a literary device than a demand. I do not think that there is one corner of the country that owes Raila Amolo Odinga. I believe that as a country, if we value certain attributes, if we value those who fought for expansion of the democratic space, if we value those who stood up for social justice, if we value those who have consistently talked about electoral justice, if we value those who have made a contribution, an economic contribution. For example, Raila Odinga talked about the bypasses and the grand plan around infrastructure that was put in place when he was Minister for Roads and Infrastructure for that short duration. If we value people who have made a contribution to society, then perhaps we should consider someone like Raila Odinga for leadership. I do not think that he wants to blackmail any corner of the country to tell them that kuna deni, or there is this debt that you must pay. I believe Raila Odinga will be able to sell his ideas and his policies, and we as ODM, we will support him in doing so that we can give a clear picture that ODM is a party that has a good plan for transforming this country. I spoke about the lack of policies and ideologies, and we have, so many people have said that this hustler and wheelbarrow narrative is political conmanship, and I do believe it is political conmanship. When it comes from the deputy president, who has been part of a government that has had a manifesto, that has had a Big Four agenda, he must tell us what is the relationship between these wheelbarrows and the 4 pillars of the Big Four agenda. How does it progress? Because what he seems to be doing is to take us 100 years before the Big Four agenda. One of the pillars in the Big Four agenda is manufacturing, and manufacturing is about innovation. You cannot try to build a manufacturing industry in this republic by sticking to inventions that are prehistoric. Countries that have invested on manufacturing are now going into robotics. They are going into advanced technology. One of the pillars of the Big Four is food security. Now, we should not be blinded just by our brothers and sisters that we see in urban areas. And my friend Mheshimiwa Gakuya, I know he represents an urban constituency. But remember that a larger proportion of Kenyans are still rural. Remember that agriculture still contributes more than 33% of our GDP. Remember that agriculture still employs more than 60% of the people in formal and non-formal employment in this country. Now, if, for example, I looked at the fishermen who I represent coming from Lake Victoria, what should I be doing? Should I be giving them prehistoric canoes and paddles and oars? Or should I be teaching them on how to do aquaculture? Why is China exporting fish all the way to Kenya? Why are we consuming Chinese fish? Because the Chinese have adopted advanced technology. They're doing a lot of aquaculture. As a result, they have enough fish to feed their billions and bring some to Kenya. Why should I not insist that the fishermen of Lake Victoria should be given modern technologies and modern tools and expertise so that they can expand their productivity? Now, what the wheelbarrow people are trying to tell us is give the people of Lake Victoria prehistoric hooks and nets and canoes and oars and paddles so that they can continue fishing the same way they used to fish 400 years ago. That is not the kind of thinking that can move a nation from the current situation we are in into a modern state. And I hope that even in all this, I hope the deputy president is going to see how foolish he's looking when he's running away from the manifesto and the building blocks of an administration where he's second in command and trying to take us 200 years back. That is not the Kenya we want. The Kenya we want, and Kenya has been a leader in innovation in the region. Kenya has been a leader in many other sectors. We cannot afford a situation where we are taking our people backward. We must look into the future. We must adopt, we must embrace new technology. And as I said, we must fix our politics. It is so sad that today we have killings in Kapedo. It is sad that today in Marsabit, the Gabra and the other community are fighting. These cycles of violence, they are predictable. Every other time we are approaching an election, you have tribal clashes flaring up because of politics. And that way, we cannot grow an economy sustainably. We will be like a country, we will not be any different from Somalia. If we can predict that every 3 years, we are going to be fighting tribe against tribe, we are going to be fighting over elections, we must fix our politics. Then, it is only then that we'll be able to fix our economics. You see, there are people who say that, no, we can fix our economics without fixing our politics. But that can only happen if we had a benevolent dictatorship in this country. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the constitution we have adopted in this country is one that espouses democracy, liberal democracy, and so we cannot afford benevolent dictatorship. That is why we must first get our politics right, and our economics will follow. But if we are a dictatorship, we will focus straight away on the economy. Look at what President Uhuru Kenyatta is doing with Nairobi Metropolitan Service. In my view, even though I am in ODM, I believe there is some constitutional vandalism going on. But people are saying that NMS is delivering. Should we take that approach, where we are getting the army to do things for us? No. We are a democracy. We are a liberal democracy. Let's fix our politics, fix our economics, but not wheelbarrows and cocotenis.
Okay, so it seems it's all about getting our politics right. James Gakuya, even as I give you the right of reply, it seems ODM is getting its politics right, at least according to the 2022 general election. What say you about Jubilee and the wrangles we are seeing? When will we start seeing preparation, perhaps?
One thing is that, in fact, these political houses must lay strategies to convince the voters to get their way. And that's why the manifestos, blueprints has to be there, so that one can be able to entice the public on the best he can be able to perform once he takes over. Unfortunately is that our country always gets into some hands of management where we cannot be able to understand what cues our ability. Because I cannot understand where we are going wrong, because Kibaki did a lot of energy to put this country out of maybe those handles we had there before during the Moi regime. And so vividly, Kibaki vigorously tried to jumpstart our economy to the level of tiger economy. It is politics which brought down Kibaki's tiger economy. When we came with a narrative of kazi ianze na kazi iendelee, sasa ikawa ni kupomoa tuanze tena. So that is how Kenya has been. And I can agree with Kajwang that at least politically, we must do something to seal our langos after election.
Do you think BBI is the resolution to that?
But I can tell you BBI is not a resolution.
Why
it's not
that?
a solution to that. Because one thing, what BBI is hearing for is bringing back positions that were there before. There before we had a prime minister in this country after the independence. That is the kind of structure we had. And this country came to an age and forget about that. Thereafter, we had multi-party. Multi-party brought what we call the official leader of opposition. It is the 2010 constitution which barred that particular position. Raila Odinga was then the prime minister. In fact, if we drafted our constitution very well, that was not the right time to kill that prime ministership. It's only that we have realized after 7 years, it was so important position, then we are trying to reinvent it back. But it was there. And Kenyans has already walked along that roadmap. Then therefore what I can say, it is not the solution, because this country went to fire in 2007, 2008 after election, where the opposition leader was very sure he has a position of official leader in the House. But actually he was not yearning for that. He was looking for the big fish, the big position. then that's why I can tell you,
All right.
even all these carrots may not seal the curiosity. Probably the contender will be, yes, if I am not getting the highest position, then I am not going to cede anything else.
All right.
And therefore, I can address and I can appeal to our political leaders that let us always be taking the interests of the nation first before we fire the nation. Because surely Kenya will be there after all these generations. And it will be able to serve this generation and generations to come.
All right.
Let us keep it safe all over. Because this is our mother, and politicians and us, we shall walk out of this country. But let us not finish the country. Let us not set the country to fire. Let us put mechanism on how we can build strong economies. Because without that, issues to do with the tribes cannot settle the problem of this country at all. But if we can walk out of that path, reason as a nation, then we can address ourselves. I can be always seeing Kajwang as my brother, but I could never see Kajwang as another color.
Okay, that's interesting. You've told us what you don't think will work, and you've also mentioned what you think will work. We'll definitely word our way through it. Alex Manyasi, it's interesting to note some of the resentments to the BBI, some of the objections, but all in all, since this will definitely form most of the talk or part of the talk this particular year in terms of politics, what do you make of the clamor around the BBI? There's been disinformation, misinformation around it, but even as we wait for the booklets to be made available to the public, what do you make of the political rhetoric going round around the BBI?
As usual in a political context, you'll always expect that the people who are pro a certain position will defend it, and those who are against it will try as much as possible to discredit what that means. So that's not surprising at all to me. However, one thing that I want to underpin is that I am a firm believer, and this is my personal opinion, in that the leadership of the day determines most of whether the country moves forward or not. And I'm saying that because we have seen this happen during the Kibaki time, for example. His style of leadership, Kibaki ignored even his own central backyard. He wasn't a man you could go to talk about stories around what I have seen or what I have heard people say. He did not entertain whether Mount Kenya was happy or not. For him, what he was focused on was taking the country forward. So when you have a leadership like that in State House, then you're more likely to be guaranteed that you are going to have a future. In the constitution that we currently have, I can almost certainly say that we will have done much more, and more than what we have done today. And if that will have happened, probably the clamor for the amendments or the changes will be something that will be very unpopular to Kenyans. The only reason why it's looking like it makes sense is because we have not utilized the chance that we've had for quite some time. And so we are making it look like the reason why a lot of things have failed is largely because of the position that we're in. We could have some truths in that, but it doesn't entirely mean that that is the only reason why we have the problems that we have today. We tried as much as possible in the current constitution to divide up institutions, to have a lot of separation of power. We created a constitution, of course, which is not perfect. If you ask me, and something has been alluded to already by Mheshimiwa, the leader of opposition is something that should have been there from the word go. That was a mistake. But having said that, I think even as we go into the rhetoric of looking at whether changing the constitution is going to be the silver bullet and whether that is going to be the magic that brings Kenya to a different level, I am not sure. Sitting here, I can't tell. I'm saying I can't tell because of what I said in the beginning. It largely depends on the leadership of the day. If we're going to have a leadership that will safeguard and approach things from a different level, we will move forward. If we in 2022 will have a leader who will slide back into looking at what is it that I need to recover, What is it that my people need to get home with? What is it that we need to balkanize others to gain political mileage? As long as we have those kind of thinkings in State House, if we have that kind of thinking in State House in 2022, then we'll be back to square one. So my imagination is that some of us, by the way, have even spoken to things that we thought were going to be important.
All right.
And under the current constitution that we needed to relook into. But some of them have been skipped, even though some of the things that have been fronted look like they can make a difference. Some of us still believe that some things that are being fronted for change are actually administrative things that should be implemented. Parliament, for example, can make quite a few changes to some of these statutes or laws that govern the way we do things. But beyond that, again, what I have noticed about the Kenyan people is that, for example, when we had Mishuki, if you give an order as a minister and make sure that you stick by it and you enforce it, things can change. Today, for instance, I keep talking about the matatu industry. It took me almost 25 minutes when I'm driving through a stretch that should take me 6 minutes. So just because matatus decide that they are law in themselves, do we need to change the constitution to make such things straight? I think we have a problem that some of the problems are constitutional, some of the problems we just need to enforce. Right. Unfortunately, we also have ministers who, to lack the better word of using, their focus maybe is on stocking up piles of resources so that they can control, I don't know what they want to control. You know, some of these things, the way Africans think is that when you want to seek for resources, you want to have limitless resources and you don't think about whether other Kenyans are surviving or not. It's very unfortunate, and that's where we find ourselves.
Well, we're definitely in a precarious situation. Senator, as you speak to the conversation around the constitutional moment vis-a-vis the enforcement of the 2010 Constitution, in terms of getting politics right, ODM party is gearing up towards the 2022 election. Nothing wrong with that, I must say. But with the rhetoric going round that perhaps the party did focus too much on the handshake politics and kind of lost its track. Well, what do you reply to this?
The objective of a political party is to advance ideas that can propel it to power. And once it is in power, to implement those ideas for the benefit of the people. We realized as ODM that there was no need to aspire to power in a country that was a basket case. If you want to aspire to power in Somalia, for example, you're going to be in serious problems or because you'll have so many challenges. So ODM was not going to watch as the state collapses and as the nation that we call Kenya collapses. And that is why ODM did what was patriotic and what any political party that has the interests of its members and the nation at heart would do: to cease fire, to sit on a table and ask the tough questions. And that is what gave rise to the 9-point agenda. You see, the trouble with politics, and particularly in this era of social media, and more so in the Trump and Brexit generation, is that there are a lot of alternative facts. There's a lot of fake news going on. It is possible, and we saw it even in the elections in the US, it is possible to create an individual using artificial intelligence to create an image of an individual who does not exist and attribute a lot of things to them. And so we have seen a lot of misinformation, a lot of fake news, and a lot of alternative facts. We have seen Cambridge Analytica kind of campaigns going on. You see today, if you went on YouTube, you're going to get some ad on YouTube telling you why you should not support BBI and why BBI is a bad thing. And yet, we are not even at the point of a referendum. So there are people who are working overdrive to ensure that they propel a fake narrative. But what I want to assure the nation is that a referendum or a constitutional amendment goes in certain stages. We are at the point of verification of signatures. There'll be the point where county assemblies will be discussing, and there'll be more public awareness. There'll be the point where Parliament, National Assembly, and Senate will be discussing, and there'll be greater public awareness. And once this is concluded, When the president is convinced that there are issues in those amendments that require a referendum, then those issues shall be framed and sent to the people for a referendum. And there'll be a very robust campaign. And I want to challenge the deputy president. If he's so opposed to the BBI, then let him lead the no brigade. Because in a referendum, it's a no or a yes. And you'll be required to form committees to either support or to oppose the document. However, BBI should not be a fault line in our politics, because everyone seems to agree that there are good things in it. There are those who think that there are issues that were left out. For example, teachers. They wanted the Teacher Service Commission to be reformed so that a representative of teachers sat in the commission, which I think is a good idea, because the fact that there's no member of the commission sitting, there's no representative of teachers sitting in the commission, has allowed TSC to decimate NAT and KUPPET and other teachers' unions.
All right.
Doctors and medical workers wanted a health service commission. But this is a first amendment. The Americans have had close to 30 amendments. This is our first amendment. Let us take the positives that are in it. There are issues that have been flagged as administrative, policy, and legislative. Let us deal with them as such. Is BBI enough? And that has been the question that I've asked. Probably it is not the right dosage for the problems that we face as a country. But is wheelbarrow the right prescription for the problems we face as a country? If you are to ask me, I think that BBI would be a much more accurate prescription than wheelbarrows for the problems we face as a country. But I liked what Mheshimiwa Gakuya said at some point, because generally we agree on some very broad principles. But the problem is that we have built politics that are so partial. You know what Alex was talking about Kibaki. There are many countries with democracy-like events. They hold elections, they have a judiciary, they have a legislature, they have an executive, and that is Kenya. Kenya has a lot of democracy-like things, but we are not really democratic because our style of politics, there is too much of we are very patrimonial. If you were to access justice in Kenya, you will go to court and they'll first ask you who you are, what's your position, and I hear nowadays they ask whether you support BBI or not.
All right.
We must build a situation where service delivery is impartial.
Okay, Senator.
Where it does not matter who is in State House, whether he comes from your village or not, but you are sure that if you have a right to a certain service or a certain good, you are going to get it irrespective of where you come from.
Okay, Senator Kajwang right there giving us impetus to some of the talking points we were highlighting during today's political point discussion. Senator right there for Homa Bay County, many thanks for your input. Democracy-like events, that's one I've had today. We're also joined by James Gakuya, who's the MP for Embakasi North. Thank you so much for your input, as well as Alex Manyasi joining us by way of Zoom, who's a governance and policy expert. Well, we've been able to wade through that political topic. We'll definitely continue covering that for you in a way only we can. We want to take a short break right here on Morning Express, barely 25 minutes past 7 a.m. A lot more in store for you. Good morning. Do keep it right here.